140 Wind. Opening. When love feels like rescue. At first, this wasn't a love story. It was a rescue story. Johnny Depp wasn't looking for passion. He was looking for peace. Years of fame, chaos, and emotional exhaustion had already taken their toll. By the time he met Amber Heard, Johnny wasn't chasing excitement anymore. He was searching for relief. Amber, on the other hand, wasn't looking for stability. She was drawn to intensity, to attention, to the gravity of a man the world already worshipped. When they met on set, it didn't feel like danger. It felt like salvation. She made him feel understood. He made her feel powerful. And for a brief moment, it looked like love. But here's the uncomfortable question no one asked at the beginning. What happens when two wounded people mistake intensity for healing? Because when love starts as rescue, someone always ends up drowning. This isn't a story about villains or heroes. It's a story about emotional wounds colliding, and the karma that follows when love is asked to fix what it never created. Before they met, two very different emotional worlds. Before Amber Heard entered Johnny Depp's life, Johnny was already tired. Not physically, emotionally. Decades of fame had turned his life into a constant performance. Every room expected something from him. Every relationship came with pressure. His long relationship with Vanessa Paradis had once given him something rare in Hollywood: quiet stability. But even that had begun to erode. Johnny didn't feel dangerous anymore. He felt invisible. By the time that relationship ended, Johnny wasn't heartbroken. He was empty. Amber Heard, meanwhile, was standing at a completely different place. She wasn't exhausted by fame. She was hungry for it. Young, ambitious, and still proving herself, Amber had learned early that attention meant survival. Being desired meant being secure. Being noticed meant being powerful. She didn't want calm, she wanted intensity. So when these two worlds collided, it didn't feel random. Johnny saw in Amber the energy he thought he had lost. Amber saw in Johnny the validation she believed would finally make her whole. And that's where the imbalance began. Because when one person is searching for peace and the other is searching for power, love doesn't meet in the middle. It tilts. What followed wasn't simply romance. It was a psychological exchange, where admiration slowly turned into dependence and intensity replaced emotional safety. And neither of them realized it yet, but the roles were already forming. One would become the rescuer, the other the storm. When love becomes a battle. At first, the arguments didn't feel dangerous. They felt intense. Raised voices were mistaken for honesty. Jealousy was framed as passion. Apologies came quickly and felt sincere. And for a while, that was enough. Because when love is built on intensity, calm feels like abandonment. Johnny tried to withdraw when things escalated. Silence was his defense. Distance was how he protected himself. But to Amber, silence felt like control. Distance felt like rejection, and rejection triggered fear. So the closer Johnny tried to pull away, the harder Amber pulled him back. What followed wasn't communication, it was escalation. Arguments didn't end, they exploded. Promises were made in the aftermath. Declarations of love followed destruction. And each cycle made the bond stronger, not weaker. This is how emotional chaos becomes addictive. Because the brain doesn't recognize stability as love when it has been trained on adrenaline. By the time friends and family noticed the warning signs, both of them were already trapped inside a shared narrative. No one understands us. Everyone is against us. Only we know the truth. And that belief, that love must be defended at all costs, is often what turns private pain into public collapse. What they didn't realize was this: love wasn't failing them. They were asking love to survive a war it was never meant to fight. From the outside, leaving looked obvious. Friends saw the warning signs. The public saw the chaos. The damage was visible. But from the inside, leaving felt impossible. This is where most people misunderstand toxic love. They assume staying means weakness, or blindness, or denial. But what Johnny and Amber were experiencing was something far more complex. It's called trauma bonding. When intense conflict is followed by intense reconciliation, the brain confuses relief with love. Pain creates fear. Fear creates attachment. And attachment creates dependency. Each fight didn't push them apart, it pulled them closer. Because after every breakdown came an emotional high: apologies, promises, vulnerability, closeness. And slowly, chaos became familiar. Familiar became safe, and safe replaced healthy. Johnny wasn't staying because he was happy. He was staying because leaving felt like emotional withdrawal. Amber wasn't staying because she felt secure. She was staying because intensity felt like connection. This is why toxic relationships don't end quietly. They end when the bond finally collapses under its own weight. In the beginning, power didn't matter. Admiration flowed naturally. Attention felt mutual. Roles were unspoken. But power always shifts in relationships built on imbalance. Johnny brought status, legacy, and influence. Amber brought youth, intensity, and emotional momentum. At first, this felt complementary. Over time, it became leverage. When one person needs peace and the other needs control, conflict becomes inevitable. Withdrawal became a weapon. Exposure became a defense. Love turned into negotiation. Affection turned into currency. And once power enters the emotional space, intimacy begins to disappear. What replaced it wasn't understanding, it was strategy. When private pain becomes public war. At some point, the relationship stopped being just theirs. The walls that once held the chaos could no longer contain it. What began as private conflict slowly spilled into the public eye, through whispers, reports, and fragments of truth told from opposite sides. And once a relationship enters the courtroom of public opinion, there are no quiet resolutions, only sides. Johnny believed that withdrawing would protect him, that silence would allow the truth to settle on its own. Amber believed that speaking out was survival, that controlling the narrative meant controlling the damage. Two strategies, two realities, colliding in the same spotlight. What followed wasn't just legal action, it was identity warfare. Careers became evidence, memories became weapons, and every moment of their shared past was dissected, questioned, and rewritten. The world didn't see a couple anymore, it saw a trial, and trials don't ask who loved more, they ask who can prove pain better. This is where karma often shifts its form, because when love turns into reputation management, truth becomes secondary to survival. And the tragedy isn't that one side lost, it's that by the time the battle ended, there was no version of victory left, only damage. As the world watched, something crucial was missed. The story stopped being about two people in pain. It became about choosing sides. Social media demanded villains. News cycles demanded headlines. Silence became suspicious. Speaking became dangerous. And complexity disappeared. What the world rarely acknowledges is this: two people can hurt each other without either being purely evil. Public judgment simplified a deeply complicated emotional collapse. And once millions of voices enter a private story, truth becomes fragmented. Karma, in this phase, wasn't about punishment, it was about exposure. Everything hidden was dragged into the light, not to be healed, but to be consumed. 140 WND. The karma and the lesson no one wins from. When the noise finally faded, what remained wasn't truth or justice, it was exhaustion. Both Johnny Depp and Amber Heard walked away from the wreckage changed, not because one had won, but because both had lost something they could never fully recover. Johnny lost the illusion that silence always protects, that love, if endured long enough, eventually heals itself. Amber lost the belief that intensity equals intimacy, that being seen by the world guarantees being understood. And karma, in this story, wasn't punishment. It was repetition. The same emotional wounds that brought them together were the ones that tore them apart, only louder and under a brighter spotlight. This is what love karma looks like in Hollywood. Not sudden tragedy, but unresolved patterns playing out until they can no longer be ignored. Because love cannot rescue us from ourselves. It can only reveal what we refuse to heal. And the most unexpected truth of all? The end of this relationship wasn't its failure. It was its message. A reminder that love built on chaos will eventually demand calm. And when calm never arrives, collapse becomes inevitable.